Hello, honeys. Welcome back to the Beesness. I'm excited to share with you that I have some pretty big things coming now officially in my personal life as well as professional career, so you may see some upcoming changes to our scheduling format. Whatever these changes end up being, I will be sure to keep you posted. As soon as I know, you will know. Our sources for today include Hyperallergic, as almost always, Art News, Artsy, and more. So here we go with your headlines, honeys. We have a little follow-up segment for you today. Nan Goldin decided to address the war in Gaza at her Berlin exhibition opening. Our recapped context featuring some new information as well from our latest source article. Some German media outlets have claimed that Goldin's endorsement of a letter published in Art Forum calling for a ceasefire in Gaza last year, which did not initially mention the October 7th Hamas attack, was anti-Semitic of her. That controversy has followed her all the way to the present, her exhibition today, a traveling version of a survey featuring her photographs and films. In our last business, we covered how a potentially problematic symposium portion was attached to this show without Goldin's knowledge or prior consent. And so Goldin used her opening speech for the exhibition to talk about a ceasefire and Gaza in general. The 14-minute address was well received by a crowd of pro-Palestine activists and artists on site. Goldin first held a moment of silence for Gaza before saying, quote, "The museum has kept its promise to allow me to talk, and I thank them," end quote. But then she began speaking from the heart. Included in her speech were quotes like, "This is my lifetime retrospective, but there is nothing in it from the past year." Also, in declaring criticism against Israel as anti-Semitic, it makes it harder to define and stop violent hatred against Jews. Goldin also said, quote, "The International Criminal Court is talking about genocide. The UN is talking about genocide. Even the Pope is talking about genocide. Yet we are not supposed to talk about this as genocide," end quote. According to the German publication Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the director of the exhibition's host institution, the New National Gallery, explicitly disagreed with and even rebutted Goldin a bit in his follow-up commentary in front of the assembled audience. He was shouted at occasionally while he spoke. The speech sparked intense disapproval from German politicians and administrators who continue the government's crackdown on any criticism of Israel and Zionism within the nation, especially within the public arts scene. For example, German Culture Minister Claudia Roth criticized the photographer for her, quote, "unbearably one-sided political views," end quote, as well as the chanting of Free Palestine during Beisenbach's speech. This is all further proof of the growing tension in the political as well as the cultural scenes of Germany over the Gaza situation. We heard last week that this year's Venice Biennale saw the second highest turnout of its history. The 7-month run of the International Art Festival's 60th edition closed November 24th, and it saw 699,300 visitors, aka the second highest turnout in its 129-year history. That even excludes the nearly 28,000 visitors who attended only the preview. The 2022 edition, titled The Milk of Dreams, brought in over 800,000 visitors and was especially compelling to me as it featured one of my selected thesis artists, Christina Quarles. 2024 saw 59% international visitors, with 30% of the attendees aged 26 or younger. It may also have seen such a high attendance because there was an extension of the exhibition's run by about 2 weeks. I know you're asking yourselves, honeys, why do we care about this attendance? As Hyperallergic puts it, the numbers signal a continuation of attendance trends that have drawn increasingly younger as well as foreign crowds to the so-called Olympics of the art world, in spite of the Italian city's efforts to mitigate over-tourism. After all, the Venice Biennale takes place in Venice. The trends in foreign and youth visitors are a bit of a continuation as well from both the 2022 and the pre-pandemic edition in 2019, which also had high numbers of young attendees. We are seeing efforts of the festival to incorporate more programming for young visitors, like its Biennale College Arte, which supports emerging international artists under the age of 30, be a big part of this draw. The 2024 Biennale also saw a 67% increase in attendance to its programming focused on accessibility. The successes of specific Venice Biennale programs as a part of its general success should be a point of learning for other international festivals. Speaking of biennales and creating something of a story sandwich for us here, you'll never guess who else is putting together a new event. Over 50 artists from Gaza have announced their decision to form their own version of the Contemporary Art Festival days before the end of the Venice Biennale's close. They will call it the Gaza Biennale. The efforts are led by Tasnim Shatat, a 26-year-old artist from Khan Yunis. He told Hyperallergic in a phone interview, translated from Arabic by performance artist Fida Ataya, quote, "The Biennale will present the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian story, and the Palestinian cause," end quote, amid ongoing Israel attacks. Shatat was the Al Risan Art Museum's inaugural Gaza Artist in Residence. The program launched this April. Also known as the Forbidden Museum, the Palestinian Cultural Institution was formed in the occupied West Bank. The Gazan artists are forming it because the Venice Biennale does not have a dedicated Palestine pavilion, though it does represent Palestinian artists in its events throughout. The VB has faced criticism this year and in previous ones for this and other actions. For example, it was petitioned by thousands in February of 2024 to exclude Israel from the event following the ICC's January 2024 preliminary ruling that genocide was plausible in Israel's war on Gaza. Shatat and the Al Rasan Art/Forbidden Museum are now attempting to raise over $90,000 for artists in Gaza to directly fund their practices, with the eventual goal to create transnational cultural institution partnerships in order to exhibit the artists' works. Artists participating in the Biennale formation are from all over Gaza, including the heavily bombarded north. Our translating artist, Ataya, said artists have overcome unbelievable obstacles already to keep producing art. They use vegetables and spices to procure pigments. They purchase limited available materials sparingly, so most of the money will support the artist's basic needs. She said, quote, "We are asking art institutions to be brave, to get into work where they can question and study this situation more than as a result of art," end quote. Other participants who spoke to Hyperallergic echoed that sentiment very strongly. Another headline from last week, an iconic art world haunt was closed after becoming a serious crime scene. The club in question, the Groucho Club in Soho, was a social hub for the young British artists in the 1990s. It was later frequented by the likes of Harry Styles, Francis Bacon, and Damien Hirst. It was sold, however, less than 2 years ago in a deal reportedly worth £40 million, or around $50 million US, to mega gallery owners Iwan and Manuela Worth, owners of Hauser & Wirth. As for the crime itself, detectives from the Central West Public Protection Team have launched investigations following reports of a woman being raped on November 13th in an attack at the club. The closure was the decision of a Westminster Council ruling Tuesday in favor of a 28-day suspension of their operating licenses by Metropolitan Police. The force claimed it applied for the suspension, quote, on the grounds that the venue had breached its licensing conditions and had been the scene of a recent serious criminal offense, end quote. As terrible as the story is, honeys, I couldn't help but note one thing. That the 34-year-old man arrested Saturday evening in Hertfordshire in connection to the crime was released on bail until Monday morning. Seems a little ridiculous. The club owners are facing more severe consequences than he is. We expect to see further legal and economic consequences for the owners of the Groucho Club Art Farm, a hospitality venue company also owned by the Worths, who were planning an offshoot of the Groucho in Yorkshire, Northern England. We will update you as we receive further word. I know this episode's been heavy, so let's lighten it up a little bit. A beloved stained glass window has returned to the Wolfsonian in Miami Beach. The work in question is a window by Harry Clark, who lived 1891 through 1931. It was commissioned by the Irish Free State in 1926 for the International Labour Court at the League of Nations building in Geneva. Clark finished the so-called Geneva window in May of 1930, but Art News says the Irish government ultimately rejected it, quote, due to its shocking content, including drunkenness, nudity, and perhaps worst of all, Protestants, end quote. So, Ireland never gifts the Geneva window to the League of Nations. Instead, artist Margaret Clark bought it back from the government in 1932. Even after she passed in 1961, she kept it in Florida as she was too offended by the Irish government's censorship of the work for it to go to an Irish museum. Back in 2020, the Wolfsonian deinstalled its permanent collection galleries for a renovation project. The window went into unofficially permanent storage, but got so many questions about and complaints about it being back there that it is now back on view at the Florida International University alongside late 19th and early 20th century Irish decorative artworks. So why we care? Of course, that the work was scandalous. We love when the people get heated. Some considered it too provocative at the time because there is, for example, in one pane, a nude bosom exposed. Another has a hand over his crotch in a separate pane. And so it's fascinating to see what passed for public decency then and now. The piece additionally speaks to major developments in as well as during Clark's life and career before his premature death at 41. Ireland had just won its independence from Great Britain 5 years prior, so this artwork was greatly influenced by the popular at the time nationalism and the context of the Celtic revival. That movement sought to create this modern Irish identity, mostly based on its ancient history and the Gaelic language. That's partially why there are such obvious contemporary Irish literary connections made in the artwork. For example, one pane honors Patrick Pearse, a poet and revolutionary who was one of the leaders of the Easter Rising of 1916, by including a poem Pearse wrote the night before his execution by the British. In fact, 7 out of the 15 total selected references were Protestants at the height of this Irish nationalism, which may be why it was so unpopular with the Irish government. Some others depicted or referenced include George Barnard Shaw, James Stephens, Sean O'Casey, James Joyce, William Butler Yeats, Shamus O'Sullivan, Lady Gregory. I myself will be in Florida for Christmas, so maybe I'll swing by and give you an update on how it looks in the new spot. We heard from artist Ingi Ivanar last week that a Qatari museum has censored her work about a 19th century harem. Ivanar's work has appeared in biennales across the globe from Venice to Sharjah. The work was one of many responses by contemporary artists set to be included in Mataf Art Museum of Modern Art's exhibition on Jean-Léon Gérôme, a 19th century French painter whose images of North Africa and the Middle East were acclaimed during their day but are now pretty heavily debated by scholars. Ivanar's piece, titled Harem of 2009, revisits a 19th century engraving made by Antoine Ignace Melling, a Frenchman who visited Istanbul, the city where Ivanar is based. She brings it to life by editing humans into it and adding text elements. Yet on opening day of the show, the institution removed one of these videos. Zaina Arida, the director of the Mataf, told the artist this was at the request of the Ministry of Culture. Ivanar received a personal apology from Sarah Raza, the show's curator, saying that she had not received an official reasoning for the removal of harem. The headline caught our attention because, as Ivanar writes to Art News, quote, "The case of my work being removed from the exhibition leads to the question of how women's rights, as well as free speech and free expression of art, change according to local values or are universal human rights," end quote, as the show has not generated any controversy in its travels to Mocha, Massachusetts, the British Museum, the LA County Museum of Art, and the Bonnier in Sweden. The Qatari Ministry of Culture did not respond to requests for comment. Last week also saw new calls from artists and art workers on the Tate to divest from donors with ties to Israel. The letter in question called for Tate leaders to break with 3 organizations run separately by arts philanthropists Anita and Poju Zabludowicz, as well as Candida Gertler, the Zabludowicz Art Trust, the Zabludowicz Art Projects, and Outset Contemporary Art Fund. The letter says in part, quote, "We believe Tate has a profound moral duty, if not a legal one, to divest from its affiliations with the Israeli state," end quote. It points to prior instances where the Tate divested from Russian donors following the invasion of Ukraine, urging similar action in relation to Palestine. The authors cited our previously mentioned international court findings from January 2024, the Zabludowicz Art Trust and Outset Contemporary Art Fund, of providing what activists term art washing, aka the use of partnerships with museums and artists to obscure ethically dubious political connections. I kinda hate to keep circling back to the same general topic, but this headline is important because the signers of the letter include current Turner Prize nominee Jasleen Kaur, the Turner Prize being one given out by the Tate, as well as past winners, including Charlotte Prodger, Helen Kamek, Lawrence Abu Habdan, in addition to just other notable artists like Sophia Almeria, Gala Porras Kim, Evan Ifekoya, and Dala Nasser. This letter also comes shortly after students at Goldsmiths successfully influenced the art school's Center for Contemporary Art to end its own relationships with Candida and Zach Gertler, so momentum is clearly gaining in this matter. Last week also saw 2 activists receive prison time for dumping powder on the Constitution case. The 2 in question were 27-year-old Jackson Kroger Green and 35-year-old Donald Zepeda, who were sentenced to 18 months and 2 years, respectively, for, quote, felony destruction of government property while protesting as members of the climate action group Declare Emergency. This so-called destruction, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C., was dumping red tempera paint powder on a display case containing the original U.S. Constitution at the National Archives back in February. There was no damage done to the Constitution itself, but it did cause over $50,000 worth of cleanup costs and required a 4-day closure of the museum's rotunda. Although the Constitution is not technically an artwork, we care about this story because, as a spokesperson for Declare Emergency told Hyperallergic, the court's ruling will lead to more awareness of the climate movement. Quote, when ordinary people like Kroger lose freedoms, the climate emergency can go into the national consciousness and we may win our human right to a livable planet, end quote. And honestly, honeys, he's kind of right. The more attention for protests involving famous art and documents we have seen, the more action we have seen in terms of climate change protests as well as legislation. Though they may give us heart palpitations, the soupings are working. And one last story to end things on a bit more of a positive note. Cart Department and West Coast Customs unveiled an art car series at the LA Auto Show last week. First question, of course, what is Cart Department? It's an emerging platform aimed at celebrating intersections of art and car culture, featuring curated content, collaborations, events. This year's launch of the Art Car series at the 2024 LA Auto Show featured 10 standouts designed by renowned artists as well as cultural leaders. The vehicles included the deconstructed Maybach from Jay-Z and Kanye West's Otis music video, as well as Keith Haring's painted 1983 Buick and Virgil Abloh's Project Galandawagon. Our attention was caught by this headline because it's an opportunity to elevate or at least respect and recognize a so-called low art form, often associated with lower economic classes as well as minoritized cultures. This is especially cool because Larry Warsh, founder of Cart Department, publisher and collector, has an art historian's mindset. Speaking to today's sources, he said, quote, the Art Car series represents a vital new genre of art that bridges the gap between art and popular culture. One of the most compelling aspects of the art cars is their capacity for storytelling. This presentation sets the stage for the cars as a time capsule for future generations to understand and appreciate our current culture. And, whoa, Mr. Warsh, I like the way you think. And that is our buzz for the week, honeys. Hope you've enjoyed your headlines and, as always, learned something new, maybe something to follow up on. With it being a whole new month, we've got a whole new lineup of goodness coming at you. Be prepared to enjoy your holiday season. But until then, until next time, take care, hydrate or dihydrate, and talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugnout. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.